In just 48 hours after the U.S. chip ban, Intel lost nearly $100 billion in market capitalization. The U.S. semiconductor industry finds itself in an unprecedented vulnerable position, causing the prices of technology equipment and services in the U.S. to soar. How much will American consumers have to pay for this technological standoff? On April 12, 2025, the Chinese government officially issued a ban on the use of U.S.-made chips and software across all government agencies and state-owned enterprises. This includes major corporations like Intel, AMD, and Micron, with the goal of completely eliminating U.S. technology from the national infrastructure by 2027, ranging from telecommunication systems, energy, to servers. According to Reuters, this policy aims to ensure digital sovereignty and reduce dependence on foreign suppliers. The immediate impact: within 48 hours, Intel's stock dropped by 18.3%, and AMD lost more than 11% of its value. The total estimated loss for U.S. chipmakers could reach $350 billion by the end of 2027, according to Bloomberg. For Americans, this is a clear sign that the U.S. tech industry is losing market share in the world's most populous market, threatening thousands of jobs and slowing down domestic technological innovation. Intel, the largest chipmaker in the U.S., is now facing unprecedented pressure. In 2024, 27% of Intel's revenue and about $22 billion came from the Chinese market. Immediately after the ban, Intel cut 20% of its workforce in the departments producing chips for personal computers and data centers. The construction of a major chip factory in Ohio, which was expected to restore the U.S.'s leading position in the semiconductor industry, has now been delayed by nearly a year, with the new operational timeline set for the end of 2026. The prices of computers and laptops using Intel chips are projected to rise by 12 to 17% next year due to increased production costs. Cloud computing services and AI infrastructure will also become more expensive, directly impacting the operational costs of small businesses and individual users. Financial Times analysts suggest that this is a domino effect that could slow down the digitalization process in fields such as healthcare, education, and national security. Not stopping at the U.S. chip ban, China is expanding its strategy for technological self-reliance aggressively. Huawei has successfully manufactured 5nm chips without needing EUV equipment from ASML, marking a technical breakthrough for the country's semiconductor industry. Each year, the Chinese government invests over $58 billion into companies like Huawei and SMIC, providing support in finance, supply chains, and research. As a result, the share of chip imports from the U.S. has dropped from 41% in 2021 to just 28% by the end of 2024. According to data from the China Semiconductor Industry Association Reuters, U.S. companies are losing market share in one of the world's largest markets. Investment in chip manufacturing in the U.S. is at risk of stagnating, leading to job losses in the high-tech sector. The cost of high-tech products in the U.S., from smartphones to AI computing systems, may continue to rise, contributing to the worsening inflation risk in consumer technology sectors. China unexpectedly halts U.S. beef imports, disrupting $2.5 billion in exports. What's behind the move, and who stands to lose? As of March 16, 2025, China has not renewed import permits for over 300 U.S. beef processing facilities, rendering a significant portion of American beef exports ineligible for entry into the Chinese market. This move follows the United States' decision to impose a 25% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles and related components, and is widely seen as part of Beijing's broader trade response. According to U.S. government data, beef exports to China plunged from an average of 2,000 metric tons per week to just 54 tons in the week ending March 20. China has also imposed additional tariffs of 10% to 15% on U.S. agricultural products, including beef. making American goods less competitive in the Chinese market. In 2024, the U.S. posted a record $8.63 billion in pork exports, with total volume reaching 3.03 million tons. Beef exports contributed $10.5 billion, accounting for roughly 14% of total domestic production. China has played a key role in this growth, representing 14% of U.S. beef export volume and 15% in value, along with 15% of pork volume and 13% of its value. Since March 2025, however, China has levied steep tariffs, 56% on U.S. beef and 81% on pork, further eroding the competitiveness of American meat products and triggering a sharp decline in exports to this vital market. As a result, surplus supply is building up domestically, putting downward pressure on prices. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, wholesale beef prices fell 1.9% in February 2025, while pork prices dropped 6.2% in January, before rebounding 7.9% the following month. While the price decline may benefit American consumers in the short term, with more affordable meat at the grocery store, long-term disruptions in export channels could reduce farm incomes, affect employment in food processing, and impact related agricultural commodities, such as corn and soybeans. In the wake of China's higher tariffs on U.S. beef and pork, Russia has seized the opportunity to strengthen its presence in the Chinese market. Sergei Dankvert, head of Russia's Federal Service for Veterinary and Phytosanitary Surveillance, Roslkoznadzor, stated that Russian meat exports are expected to reach 1 million tons in 2025, up from 860,000 tons in 2024. China, the world's largest consumer and importer of beef, brought in a record 2.87 million tons in 2024. Russia's pricing and quality advantages are positioning it as a key alternative supplier. The expansion of Russian meat exports may also help stabilize domestic Chinese meat prices, especially as beef prices fell by 22% in 2024 due to oversupply. Rising beef imports in China reflect increasing consumer demand, driven by higher incomes and a growing preference for premium meat products. To reduce dependency on a limited number of suppliers, China has broadened the list of approved beef exporters. Recent policy changes have allowed more producers from Australia and Russia to enter the market, while easing restrictions on German beef. Other key suppliers include Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Belarus, and Chile. For Chinese consumers, this diversification helps ensure supply stability and price consistency, meeting the country's growing demand for beef. For the U.S., however, China's strategic pivot in sourcing could lead to prolonged oversupply in the domestic beef market, with potential implications for pricing and agricultural sector stability. The United States has imposed record-high tariffs on Chinese goods, but the question remains, which side stands to lose more? While China responds with currency devaluation and redirects its exports, the world now faces the risk of deepening divisions. In the first quarter of 2025, the administration of President Trump imposed record-high tariffs, with some products reaching as high as 145% on imports from China, aiming to reduce dependency and pressure Beijing to make concessions on trade and technology. According to AP News, however, but as import costs rose rapidly, many small American businesses were forced to raise prices, cut staff, or withdraw from the market. A retail company in California reported having to pay nearly $630,000 more per year due to the new tariffs. A coffee machine that used to cost $120 has now risen to over $180. This has caused consumers to become more cautious in their daily spending. The ripple effect has also placed the Federal Reserve, the Fed, in a difficult position. If it maintains high interest rates to contain inflation, it risks stifling growth. But if it lowers rates to stimulate demand, it puts pressure on the U.S. dollar. By the end of March 2025, the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, had risen by 4.2% compared to the same period last year, the highest in 18 months. In this context, households with young children or elderly members are especially affected, as healthcare and food costs have surged. Immediately following the United States' decision to raise tariffs on Chinese goods to as high as 145%, Beijing allowed the renminbi to depreciate significantly. This devaluation made Chinese exports more affordable in global markets. According to a report from Bloomberg, in April 2025, the RMB-USD exchange rate dropped to 7.4290, the weakest level since 2010. However, Chinese consumers are now experiencing price increases of 10 to 20% on imported goods compared to the beginning of the year. Many households have begun to shift their preference toward domestic products. At the same time, China swiftly restructured its export strategy, redirecting a large share toward ASEAN and Europe. According to Global Times, in the first quarter of 2025, exports to ASEAN rose by 20.3%, especially in categories such as lithium batteries, auto parts, and consumer electronics. As for Europe, the World Trade Organization, the WTO, projects that Chinese exports to the region could increase by an additional 4 to 9% in 2025. One outcome of this shift is that many Chinese workers are now required to retrain and acquire new skills in order to adapt to changes in production lines, which may temporarily disrupt their incomes. According to AP News, in the first quarter of 2025, China's GDP grew by 5.4%, exceeding the projected 5.1%, largely due to a surge in exports prior to the implementation of new U.S. tariffs. Nevertheless, falling real estate prices and a 9.9% decline in property sector investment have raised concerns among many households. Asset values have dropped, and low inflation has contributed to a slowdown in the domestic consumption, although exports increased by 6.9%, enabling China to post a trade surplus of 1.96 trillion yuan in the first quarter. A 6% drop in imports has led many families to reduce their purchases of imported goods. In April 2025, the US dollar fell nearly 10% from its peak earlier in the year, marking its sharpest decline since 2022. The USD index dropped below the 100-point threshold, reflecting a weakening of global confidence in the dollar. Prices for imported goods, such as electronics and food, have risen. In addition, interest rates on home and consumer loans have also increased, making everyday living costs more burdensome. President Trump's trade and diplomatic policies are contributing to a growing divide between the United States. The U.S.-China trade dispute has entered one of its most volatile phases, marked by tit-for-tat tariffs, tighter controls on rare earth exports, and growing uncertainty in global supply chains. As economic strategies sharpen on both sides, questions arise over who holds the stronger position in this unfolding standoff. On April 9th, President Donald Trump announced a new 125% tariff on Chinese imports. According to a senior White House official, this figure adds to a previously imposed 20% tariff targeting products linked to the opioid fentanyl, bringing the total effective tariff rate to 145%. The decision followed China's move to impose an 84% tariff on American goods, another sign of intensifying friction between the world's two largest economies. In response, Beijing swiftly announced it would impose a 125% tariff on all U.S. origin goods entering China, effective April 12th. On April 4th, 2025, China formally lodged a complaint with the World Trade Organization, WTO, challenging the U.S. decision to impose an additional 34% tariff on Chinese products, bringing the total rate to approximately 54%. China argues that the U.S. measures violate WTO rules and is urging a rollback of the new tariffs. Under WTO procedures, both parties are expected to enter a 60-day consultation period. Should these discussions fail, China may request the involvement of the WTO's dispute settlement body. Beijing has reiterated its intention to take firm and proportionate steps to safeguard its lawful rights and interests. Chinese authorities emphasize that no party truly benefits from a trade war and called on the U.S. to lift unilateral tariffs and pursue solutions through mutual respect rather than pressure. In a concurrent move, China announced new export controls on 7 critical rare earth elements: samarium, gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium, lutetium, scandium, and yttrium. These materials are essential in advanced manufacturing sectors, including electric vehicles, defense systems, and consumer electronics. China currently accounts for around 90% of global rare earth production and processing. In light of the new restrictions, several countries and multinational firms have begun seeking alternative sources and investing in non-Chinese rare earth supply chains. At present, the U.S. produces about 12% of the world's rare earth output, primarily from the Mountain Pass mine in California. However, due to limited domestic processing capacity, nearly 2/3 of this output is still sent to China for refinement. To reduce reliance on foreign processing, the U.S. government has launched several key investment initiatives. MP Materials is building a processing facility at Mountain Pass, aimed at supplying rare earth magnets to General Motors by year-end. Lynas Rare Earths received $258 million from the U.S. Department of Defense to construct a rare earth refinery in Texas, though the project has faced delays over wastewater management issues. VASI, a German company, secured nearly $100 million from the U.S. government to establish a rare earth magnet manufacturing site in South Carolina. Despite these efforts, several challenges persist. High costs. Building a rare earth facility in the U.S. can cost 3 times as much as in China. Environmental regulations. Stringent permitting and environmental rules have delayed multiple projects. Skilled labor shortage. A lack of domestic expertise in rare earth processing has driven demand for specialized training and international recruitment. Tensions between the United States and Germany are rising over tariffs and U.S. bonds, adding uncertainty to global financial markets. Europe's move toward greater strategic autonomy and the potential repatriation of gold reserves may reshape the global economic landscape. German Economy Minister Robert Habeck expressed concern about how the U.S. calculates tariffs, especially in the pharmaceutical sector. He emphasized the need for both countries to consider mutual impacts when applying trade measures. Germany is one of the world's top pharmaceutical exporters, accounting for about 14 to 15% of global pharmaceutical exports in 2024, according to Eurostat. U.S. demand for European pharmaceuticals continues to grow, with average annual imports increasing around 6% from 2020 to 2024, according to Bloomberg. Recent U.S. bond auctions have seen lower participation, raising concerns that foreign investors, including those in Europe and Asia, may slow down purchases or reduce their holdings. Reports suggest Germany is considering moving 1,200 tons of gold, valued at approximately $124 billion, from the Federal Reserve in New York back to Germany. If carried out, the move would aim to strengthen national control over reserves amid global instability. Under President Biden, the U.S. economy and stock markets have shown stable growth, with some indexes reaching strong annual gains, Bloomberg Financial Times. In contrast, during Trump's term, U.S. market performance often lagged behind economies like Japan, Canada, the UK, Germany, and China. Biden has focused on rebuilding multilateral alliances, particularly NATO and ties with Europe, to support global stability. In contrast, the Trump administration took a different foreign policy approach, shifting traditional partnerships and cooperation strategies. Minister Habeck and other EU leaders stressed the importance of unity in external trade talks, urging member states to avoid individual country negotiations in order to protect the EU's long-term interests. The EU is expanding trade relations with major partners such as South Korea, Japan, India, and Indonesia, aiming to diversify markets and reduce dependence on any single economy. It is also considering joining the CPTPP trade pact as part of its broader global strategy. European leaders are prioritizing reduced reliance on external partners in key areas like defense and economic security. CDU leader Friedrich Merz highlighted the need for greater autonomy and the ability to respond to challenges independently and proactively.